The ledger hit the worn mahogany desk with a thud that echoed through the cramped office like a gunshot. And Tessa Whitmore looked up from her contract work to find a cowboy standing in her doorway with desperation written across his sun-weathered face. His Stetson was dusty from what must have been a hard ride into Las Cruces, and his blue eyes held the kind of worry that came from watching everything a man built slip through his fingers like desert sand. "They told me at the land office you could read legal documents faster than any lawyer in New Mexico territory," he said, his voice rough as gravel. "Said you had a mind for numbers and contracts that could spot a bad deal from a mile away." Tessa set down her pen, studying the stranger who had burst into her modest office on this scorching July afternoon in 1882. She had opened her document review business 6 months ago after her father passed, leaving her his small house in Las Cruces and enough money to last a year if she was careful. Most people in town thought it strange that a 22-year-old woman would try to make her living reading contracts and keeping books, but Tessa had always been good with numbers and legal language. Her father, a former judge, had taught her well before illness took him. "That depends on what you need read and how quickly you need it done," she replied, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "And who you are." The cowboy removed his hat, revealing dark brown hair that curled slightly at the ends from sweat and heat. He was tall, probably in his mid-20s, with the kind of build that came from years of ranch work. His hands were calloused, his face tanned, and there was an honesty in his expression that Tessa found herself wanting to trust despite her usual caution. "Name is Bennett Hayes. I own the Three Rivers Ranch about 10 miles north of here, or at least I thought I owned it." He placed the ledger on her desk, followed by a thick stack of papers tied with string. "My father died 8 months ago, left me the ranch, the cattle, everything. But now there is a man named Victor Sutton claiming he has legal right to half my land and a percentage of my profits. Says my father signed papers before he died, made some kind of partnership agreement." Tessa untied the string and began spreading the documents across her desk. Her trained eye immediately started scanning the pages, taking in dates, signatures, legal terminology. "When did Sutton present these papers?" 2 weeks ago. Gave me until the end of the month to comply, or he said he would take me to court. That is 12 days from now." Bennett leaned forward, his voice urgent. "Miss Whitmore, I have been trying to read through these contracts myself, but half the legal language makes no sense to me. My father was a good rancher, but he was not educated. Neither am I, not in this way. I can manage cattle and horses, fix a fence, track a lost steer across 50 miles of desert, but these papers might as well be written in a foreign language." She could hear the frustration in his voice, the shame of a proud man admitting he needed help with something beyond his skills. Tessa understood that feeling. She had faced similar prejudice when she announced her intentions to work in a field dominated by men. Judge Whitmore's daughter should marry well, the townspeople whispered, not soil her hands with business matters. "Tell me about your father's last months," Tessa said, still examining the documents. "Was he of sound mind? Did he mention Victor Sutton or any business arrangements?" Bennett's jaw tightened. "My father was sick for nearly a year before he passed. Cancer, the doctor said. Toward the end, he was taking laudanum for the pain, and there were days he barely knew where he was. But he never mentioned Sutton, never said anything about selling part of the ranch or taking on a partner. That land has been in my family since 1867. My father fought to keep it through drought, through Comanche raids, through everything the territory could throw at us. He would not have given away half of it without telling me." Tessa nodded, making notes on a separate piece of paper. "And this Victor Sutton, what do you know about him?" "He showed up in Las Cruces about a year ago." Bought the old Martinez property, started calling himself a businessman. Deals in land acquisitions, mining claims, water rights. Some folks say he is legitimate, others say he is a con man who preys on people who cannot read fine print. Bennett's hands curled into fists on his knees. I do not care what he calls himself. I just need to know if these papers are real or if he is trying to steal my family's land. Let me work, Tessa said, already absorbed in the first contract. This will take several hours. There is a cafe 2 doors down if you need food. But Bennett did not leave. He sat in that chair, hat in his hands, watching her work with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable but somehow did not. Tessa lost herself in the documents, her mind processing the legal language at a speed that had always come naturally to her. She could see patterns in contracts the way some people could see pictures in clouds, could spot inconsistencies and problems that others missed entirely. The sun moved across the sky outside her window, and still she read, making notes, cross-referencing dates and signatures. Bennett remained silent, occasionally shifting in his chair but never interrupting. There was something peaceful about his presence, Tessa realized. Most men felt the need to fill silence with talk, to prove their intelligence or importance. Bennett Hayes simply sat and waited, trusting her to do what he had hired her to do. It was nearly sunset when Tessa finally looked up, and what she had discovered made her angry in a way that had her hands trembling slightly as she set down the last page. "These contracts are forgeries," she said flatly. "Very good forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless." Bennett was on his feet in an instant. "Are you certain? Look here." Tessa pointed to a signature on the partnership agreement. "This is supposedly your father's mark from March of this year, but look at this signature on the ranch deed from 1867. She placed the 2 documents side by side. "The slant is different, the pressure of the pen is different. Your father signed the deed with a strong, steady hand. This partnership signature is shaky, uncertain, almost traced." "He was sick in March," Bennett said, his voice rough with emotion. "Could barely hold a cup without help." "Exactly. And there is more. This witness signature here, claiming to verify your father's mark, supposedly comes from a man named Robert Chen. But I processed the death records for Las Cruces as part of my work for the territorial office. Robert Chen died in February, a month before this document claims he witnessed anything." Bennett's face had gone hard as stone. "Sutton used a dead man's name. He did. And there are other problems. The legal language in these contracts does not match territorial standards from this year. Some of the phrasing is outdated, pulled from contracts written years ago. It is as if Sutton cobbled together pieces from other documents and hoped no one would notice." Tessa stood, facing Bennett across the desk. "These papers would not hold up in any legitimate court. But Sutton is counting on you not knowing that, on you being frightened enough to simply comply rather than fight." "How much do I owe you for this work?" Bennett asked, reaching for his pocket. Tessa named a fair price for 6 hours of detailed contract review, and Bennett counted out the money without hesitation. His hands brushed hers as he placed the bills on the desk, and Tessa felt an unexpected warmth at the contact. "I need you to write up your findings," Bennett said. "Something I can take to the sheriff, to a judge if necessary. Documentation that these contracts are false. I can do that. Give me until tomorrow morning." Tessa hesitated, then added, "You should be careful with Sutton. A man willing to forge documents is capable of other things." "I can handle Sutton." But there was something in Bennett's eyes that made Tessa worry. She had seen that look before on her father's face when he dealt with men who thought they were above the law. Determination mixed with barely controlled anger, a dangerous combination. "Come back at 8 tomorrow morning," she said firmly. I will have everything prepared. And Mr. Hayes, promise me you will not confront Sutton until you have legal documentation in hand. Anger makes us careless." Bennett studied her for a long moment, and Tessa had the strange sensation that he was seeing past her professional demeanor to something deeper. "You are not what I expected when they told me about the woman who reads contracts," he said finally. "What did you expect? Someone older? Someone harder?" He settled his hat back on his head. "You have kind eyes, Miss Whitmore, but there is steel in you too. I can see why your father taught you this work. You have a gift for it." The compliment caught Tessa off guard, warming her in a way that had nothing to do with the desert heat still radiating through her office walls. 8 o'clock tomorrow," she repeated, trying to keep her voice steady. After Bennett left, Tessa sat back down at her desk and began preparing the legal documentation he would need. But her mind kept drifting to the cowboy with worried blue eyes and calloused hands, the way he had trusted her completely with something that clearly meant everything to him. Most men would have questioned her findings, demanded to know how a woman could be certain. Bennett Hayes had simply believed her. That night, Tessa worked by lamplight, crafting a detailed analysis of every flaw in Sutton's forged documents. She made 3 copies of everything, knowing that legal battles often came down to having proper documentation. By the time she finally went to bed in the small room behind her office, it was past midnight, and her hands were cramped from writing. She dreamed of ranches and wide open spaces, of a tall cowboy teaching her to ride beneath a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Bennett arrived at precisely 8 o'clock the next morning, looking as though he had not slept much either. Tessa had coffee ready, strong and black the way she preferred it, and Bennett accepted a cup gratefully. "I rode out to the ranch last night after I left here," he said. "Checked my father's private papers, letters, anything that might have his signature. You were right about everything." His handwriting changed completely in those final months when the laudanum had him. That signature on Sutton's papers does not match anything from March. Tessa handed him the documentation she had prepared. "This outlines every flaw in Sutton's contracts, with references to territorial law and standards for legal documents. I have also included an affidavit stating my qualifications to make such an analysis. My father's reputation should carry weight with the local judge." Bennett read through the papers slowly, his lips moving slightly as he worked through the legal language. Tessa found herself charmed by his determination to understand, even though she knew the terminology was challenging for him. "This is thorough," he said finally. "More than I could have hoped for, but I have to ask, why did you work through the night on this? You could have taken a few days, charged me more." The question was fair, but Tessa was not entirely sure of the answer herself. "I do not like seeing people taken advantage of," she said finally. "And your case interested me. Sutton has been buying up property around Las Cruces for months, always managing to acquire land at prices well below market value. I suspected he was using questionable methods, but I had no proof. Your contracts gave me that proof. You think he has done this before?" "I do, and if we can expose him with your case, it might help others who have already lost their land." Tessa poured herself more coffee, organizing her thoughts. "But you need to take this to the territorial judge, not just the local sheriff. Judge Morrison sits court in Las Cruces twice a month. His next session is in 5 days. Bennett set down the papers and looked at her with an expression that made her heart beat faster. "Come with me." "What?" "To see the judge, to present this case." He leaned forward, his voice urgent. "You understand these documents better than I ever could. You can explain the problems, answer his questions. Having you there would make all the difference." Tessa hesitated. Appearing in court was different from working quietly in her office. It would put her in direct conflict with Victor Sutton, a man who clearly had no qualms about breaking the law. It would also thrust her into public view in a way that would give the town gossips plenty to talk about. But when she looked at Bennett Hayes, at the hope and trust in his eyes, she found herself nodding. "I will go with you. But I need to examine your father's ranch deed and any other ownership documents first. If Sutton challenges us in court, we need to have perfect documentation of your legitimate claim to the land." Relief washed over Bennett's face. "Come out to the ranch today. I will show you everything." That was how Tessa found herself riding in a wagon next to Bennett Hayes on a blazing July morning, heading north out of Las Cruces toward Three Rivers Ranch. She had packed her document case carefully, bringing extra paper and ink in case she needed to make additional copies. Bennett handled the horses with easy competence, and they fell into comfortable conversation as the miles passed. "My father came to New Mexico in 1865, Bennett told her, right after the war ended. He had fought for the Union, seen terrible things, wanted to start fresh somewhere the land was open and free. He met my mother in Santa Fe, married her within 2 months. She was the daughter of a merchant, educated, refined. Everyone said she was foolish to marry a man with nothing but determination and a worn-out horse. But she did anyway," Tessa said, watching the desert landscape roll past. "She did. They built the ranch from nothing, just the two of them at first. Bought cattle when they could afford them, fought off raiders, survived years when the drought nearly killed everything. My mother died when I was 12. Fever took her in the winter. After that, it was just my father and me." Bennett's voice was thick with memory. "He taught me everything about ranching, about being a man who keeps his word. And he always said the land was our legacy, the one thing no one could take from us." "Except someone is trying to take it now," Tessa said softly. "Not if I can help it. Not if we can help it." He glanced at her, and something in that look made Tessa's breath catch. "I know we just met yesterday, Miss Whitmore, but I have a feeling about you. A feeling that you coming into my life right now was not just coincidence." Tessa did not believe in fate or divine intervention, but she understood what he meant. Sometimes people entered your life at exactly the moment you needed them most. "Call me Tessa," she said. "If we are going to fight this battle together, we should probably use first names. Tessa." He tested the name, and she liked the way it sounded in his rough voice. "I am Bennett, though most folks call me Ben." Three Rivers Ranch was beautiful in a stark, desert way that Tessa had not expected. The ranch house was adobe, built solid to withstand the brutal summers and cold winters of the New Mexico territory. Cottonwood trees had been planted around it for shade, and she could see the glint of water from a creek in the distance. Corrals held horses and cattle, and several outbuildings spoke of a working ranch that had been carefully maintained over years. "It is beautiful," Tessa said honestly as Bennett helped her down from the wagon. His hands lingered at her waist for a moment longer than necessary, and she found she did not mind. "It is home," he said simply. "Everything that matters to me is here." Inside, the house was neat but clearly lacking a woman's touch. Bennett had obviously tried to keep things clean, but there was a bachelor quality to the space. He led her to a sturdy table where he had laid out all his father's papers, organized as best he could. Tessa spent the next several hours going through every document related to the ranch's ownership. She found the original land grant, the water rights agreements, the bills of sale for cattle purchases over the years. Everything was in order, every signature legitimate. Benjamin Hayes had been a meticulous record keeper despite his limited education, and his son had inherited that trait. "Your father's papers are perfect," Tessa said finally, sitting back from the table. "Clear ownership going back to the original purchase. Sutton's forged contracts do not have a chance of holding up against this documentation. Bennett had been watching her work with the same patient intensity he had shown in her office. Now he stood and moved to the kitchen area. "You must be hungry. Let me make us something to eat." Tessa realized it was well past noon and she was indeed hungry. She watched as Bennett prepared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and cold beef from the larder. His movements in the kitchen were efficient, practiced. He had clearly been taking care of himself for years. They ate at the table, surrounded by legal documents and the quiet sounds of the ranch outside. Tessa found herself relaxing in a way she rarely did around men. Bennett did not try to impress her or dominate the conversation. He asked about her life, her father, how she had learned contract law. He seemed genuinely interested in her answers. "My father always said I had a mind like a steel trap," Tessa told him. "I could read something once and remember it perfectly. When other girls were learning needlework and dancing, I was in his study reading law books. Some people thought he was ruining me for marriage by educating me so thoroughly." "Those people were fools," Bennett said firmly. "You should never apologize for being intelligent." The simple statement, delivered with such conviction, made Tessa's throat tighten unexpectedly. She had spent so much of her life defending her choices, proving her worth. To have this cowboy simply accept her for who she was felt like a gift. "What about you?" she asked. "Did you ever want anything besides ranching?" Bennett considered the question seriously. "When I was younger, I thought about seeing more of the country. Maybe going east to the big cities, seeing what was out there beyond New Mexico. But after my mother died, I realized this land was in my blood. I cannot imagine living anywhere else, doing anything else. The ranch is not just property to me. It is family, history, legacy." "That is why we cannot let Sutton take it," Tessa said. "That is why we will not let him take it." Bennett reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "Thank you, Tessa, for believing me, for helping me. I know you are taking a risk getting involved in this." "Some things are worth the risk," she replied, and knew she was not just talking about the legal case anymore. They worked together through the afternoon, organizing documents and preparing for the court appearance. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Bennett insisted on driving Tessa back to Las Cruces. "You should stay for dinner," he said as they loaded her document case back into the wagon. "It is a long ride back, and I make a decent stew." Tessa knew she should refuse. Spending more time alone with Bennett Hayes was dangerous to her carefully guarded heart, but she found herself agreeing, found herself wanting to stay in his company just a little longer. The stew was indeed decent, savory with vegetables from a small garden behind the house and beef from the ranch's own cattle. They ate as the sky outside turned purple and orange, and Bennett lit lamps against the gathering darkness. The scene felt domestic, comfortable, as if they had shared hundreds of meals together rather than just one. "I should get back," Tessa said reluctantly when they had finished eating and cleaned up together. "People will talk if I am gone too long." "Let them talk," Bennett said, but he was already reaching for his hat. "Though I understand. A woman's reputation matters in a town like Las Cruces." During the ride back, they talked about the upcoming court case, about strategy and possible challenges Sutton might raise. But beneath the practical conversation, Tessa felt something else building between them, a connection that had nothing to do with contracts and everything to do with the way Bennett looked at her in the lamplight, the way her heart lifted when he smiled. "I will see you in 4 days," Bennett said when he dropped her at her office. "The day before we meet with the judge. Be careful until then," Tessa cautioned. "If Sutton gets wind that you have found problems with his documents, he might do something desperate. I can handle myself. But I appreciate your concern." Bennett hesitated, then added softly, "I appreciate everything about you, Tessa Whitmore." She watched him drive away into the night, her heart beating faster than it should for a woman who had known this man for barely 2 days. The next morning, Tessa received an unexpected visitor. Victor Sutton stood in her office doorway, dressed in an expensive suit that looked out of place in the dusty frontier town. He was probably in his 40s, with slicked-back dark hair and cold eyes that assessed her the way a snake might study a mouse. "Miss Whitmore," he said smoothly, removing his hat. "I understand you have been doing some contract work for Bennett Hayes." Tessa kept her expression neutral, though her mind was racing. How had Sutton found out about her involvement? "I am not at liberty to discuss my clients or their business, Mr. Sutton." Of course. Professional discretion, very admirable." Sutton moved into her office without being invited, his eyes scanning the neat space. "I simply wanted to introduce myself, make sure you understood the situation you are involving yourself in. The Hayes property matter is complex, with legitimate legal claims on both sides. It would be unfortunate if an inexperienced young woman found herself on the wrong side of a territorial court decision." The threat was veiled but clear. Tessa stood, drawing herself up to her full height even though she was still nearly a foot shorter than Sutton. "I have reviewed the documents in question thoroughly, Mr. Sutton. My analysis will speak for itself in court." Sutton's smile did not reach his eyes. "I am sure your analysis is very thorough, Miss Whitmore. Your late father had an excellent reputation." But reputation can be a fragile thing, especially for a woman trying to establish herself in a man's profession. One wrong move, one mistake in judgment, and that reputation crumbles. "Is there something specific you came here to say, Mr. Sutton? Because I have work to do." "Just a friendly warning, my dear. Bennett Hayes is a stubborn man fighting a losing battle. When he loses his ranch, and he will lose it, everyone associated with his doomed cause will suffer. The smart move would be to distance yourself now, before you are dragged down with him." Tessa met his cold gaze steadily. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Sutton, but I am quite capable of making my own professional decisions. Now, if you will excuse me, I have contracts to review." For a moment, Sutton's mask of civility slipped, and Tessa saw something ugly beneath it, a cruelty that confirmed everything she suspected about the man. Then he replaced his hat and gave her a mocking bow. "I hope you do not regret your choice, Miss Whitmore. Las Cruces can be an unforgiving place for those who make enemies of the wrong people." After he left, Tessa sat down at her desk, her hands shaking slightly. She should have been frightened by Sutton's thinly veiled threats, but instead she felt only anger and determination. Men like Sutton had been underestimating her entire life, assuming that being female made her weak or easily intimidated. They were always surprised when she proved them wrong. She spent the next 3 days preparing for the court appearance with an intensity that bordered on obsession. She reviewed every detail of Bennett's case, anticipating every argument Sutton might make, preparing counterpoints and legal precedents. She also did some quiet investigating, talking to people around Las Cruces about Sutton's other land acquisitions. What she discovered was disturbing. Sutton had purchased at least 6 properties in the past year, all at suspiciously low prices. The previous owners had either died shortly before the sales or had been elderly and possibly not fully competent when they signed over their land. Nobody had questioned the transactions because Sutton always had paperwork that seemed legitimate on the surface. Bennett came to see her the day before the court appearance, and Tessa shared what she had learned. "He is running a systematic fraud operation," she said, showing Bennett her notes. "Targeting vulnerable property owners, forging documents, using intimidation to prevent challenges. Your case is just the latest in a pattern. Bennett's jaw was tight with anger. Why has no one stopped him before now? Because most of his victims were isolated, had no family to fight for them, or did not understand the legal system well enough to challenge him effectively. You are different. You have legitimate documentation, and you have someone who can read the fine print. Tessa met his eyes across her desk. Sutton came to see me 3 days ago. He tried to intimidate me into dropping your case. He what? Bennett was on his feet instantly, his hands curled into fists. Did he threaten you? Nothing explicit enough to take to the sheriff. Just implications about my reputation and business. Tessa stood as well, moving around the desk to face him. I am telling you this so you know what kind of man we are dealing with, not because I am frightened. I have no intention of backing down. Bennett looked at her with something fierce and protective in his eyes. He should not have involved you in this. If he has hurt you in any way, I will make him regret it. Ben. Tessa reached out, touching his arm gently. I can take care of myself. What I need from you is to stay calm tomorrow in court. Do not let Sutton provoke you into doing something that could hurt our case. He took a deep breath, visibly controlling his anger. You are right. I am sorry. It is just that the thought of him threatening you makes me want to break things, preferably his face. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Tessa found herself smiling. I appreciate the sentiment, but we will beat him the right way with the law and the truth on our side. Bennett caught her hand, the one still resting on his arm. When did you become the brave one? I came to you for help with contracts, and instead I found someone who is willing to stand up to a dangerous man for the sake of what is right. Maybe we found each other, Tessa said softly. Maybe we both needed someone who understands what it means to fight for something important. They stood there in the quiet office, hands linked, and Tessa felt the moment shift into something deeper. Bennett stepped closer, his free hand coming up to cup her face gently. I have to be honest with you, Tessa. This stopped being just about saving my ranch somewhere around the second time you explained legal precedent to me. His thumb brushed her cheek. I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the moment you looked up from those contracts and told me they were forgeries. You were so certain, so competent, so beautiful. Tessa's heart was racing. Ben, we should probably focus on tomorrow, on the case. You are right, we should. But he did not step back. But after tomorrow, after we beat Sutton and save the ranch, I want to take you to dinner. A real dinner, not just stew at the ranch. I want to court you properly if you will let me. The old-fashioned word made Tessa smile. Court me, like a gentleman. I may be just a cowboy, but my mother raised me to be a gentleman when it matters. He was smiling too now, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. So will you? Let me court you. Tessa knew she should be cautious, should think about all the practical reasons why getting involved with a client was complicated. But when she looked into Bennett Hayes' honest blue eyes, all those reasons seemed unimportant compared to the way he made her feel seen, valued, and cherished. Ask me again after we win tomorrow, she said, when everything is settled and the ranch is secured. That sounds like a yes waiting to happen. Bennett leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she did not, he kissed her softly, carefully, as if she were something precious. The kiss was brief but full of promise, and when they parted, Tessa felt flushed and happy in a way she had not experienced before. Now we both have extra motivation to win this case, Bennett said, his voice rough with emotion. I am fighting for my ranch, and for the chance to court the most remarkable woman I have ever met. They spent the rest of the evening going over their strategy one final time, but there was a new ease between them now, an understanding that whatever happened in court tomorrow, they were in this together. The territorial courthouse in Las Cruces was a modest adobe building that doubled as the land office and administrative center. Judge Morrison was known for being fair but stern, a former attorney from Ohio who had come west seeking opportunity and ended up settling in New Mexico territory. The courtroom was packed when Tessa and Bennett arrived, word having spread that there would be an interesting legal battle that morning. Victor Sutton was already there with his attorney, a slick-looking man from Santa Fe named Raymond Pike. Sutton's eyes narrowed when he saw Tessa enter with Bennett, but he quickly schooled his expression back to neutral confidence. Judge Morrison called the proceeding to order, and Sutton's attorney began by presenting the partnership contracts and demanding that Bennett comply with their terms or face legal consequences for breach of agreement. Pike was eloquent and persuasive, making the forged documents sound entirely legitimate. Then it was their turn. Bennett stood before the judge, but it was Tessa who spoke, her voice clear and confident as she presented her analysis. "Your Honor, I have thoroughly examined the documents Mr. Sutton has presented, and I have found multiple serious flaws that indicate these contracts are forgeries." She walked the judge through each problem systematically, pointing out the signature inconsistencies, the dead witness, the outdated legal language, the suspicious timing with Benjamin Hayes' illness. Judge Morrison listened carefully, asking sharp questions that Tessa answered with precision. She could see Pike conferring urgently with Sutton, clearly not having expected such a detailed rebuttal. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Tessa continued, "I have evidence that Mr. Sutton has engaged in a pattern of questionable land acquisitions over the past year. While I cannot speak to the legitimacy of those other transactions without examining their specific documentation, the pattern is concerning and relevant to evaluating his claims in this case." Pike objected loudly, but Judge Morrison silenced him with a raised hand. "I will decide what is relevant, counsel. Miss Whitmore, do you have documentation to support your analysis?" Tessa presented the 3 copies she had made, along with examples of Benjamin Hayes' genuine signatures from various documents over the years. The contrast between the real signatures and the forged one was clear even to an untrained eye. Judge Morrison studied the documents for what felt like an eternity while the courtroom waited in tense silence. Finally, he looked up, his expression grave. "Mr. Pike, Mr. Sutton, these contracts appear to be fraudulent. The inconsistencies Miss Whitmore has identified are significant and troubling. The use of a deceased man as a witness is particularly damning." The judge's voice hardened. "I am dismissing your claim entirely. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the territorial marshal for investigation into possible criminal fraud." The courtroom erupted in surprised murmurs. Sutton leaped to his feet, his face red with fury. "This is outrageous. That woman has no legal standing to present evidence in this court. She is not a licensed attorney. Miss Whitmore is presenting document analysis and expert testimony, which she is qualified to provide based on her training and experience," Judge Morrison replied coldly. "Her findings are supported by clear evidence. Your objection is overruled, and I suggest you sit down, Mr. Sutton, before I hold you in contempt." Sutton looked like he wanted to argue further, but Pike pulled him back into his seat, clearly recognizing that they had lost decisively. Judge Morrison turned to Bennett. "Mr. Hayes, your ownership of 3 Rivers Ranch is confirmed and undisputed. I apologize that the court's time and your resources were wasted on this fraudulent claim. I am also ordering Mr. Sutton to pay your legal costs and fees." Bennett thanked the judge, his voice thick with relief and gratitude. As they left the courtroom, people Tessa had never met stopped to shake her hand and congratulate her on her skilled presentation. Several mentioned that they had heard about her contract review services and would be seeking her help with their own business matters. Outside in the bright July sunshine, Bennett grabbed Tessa by the waist and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "You did it. You saved the ranch." "We did it," Tessa corrected, laughing too as he set her back on her feet. "Your documentation made all the difference." "My documentation just sat there being paper. You were brilliant in there. The way you presented everything, the way you stood up to Pike and Sutton without flinching." Bennett was still holding her, apparently unconcerned that half the town could see them. "I have never been more impressed by anyone in my life." Victor Sutton emerged from the courthouse at that moment, his face twisted with rage. He stopped when he saw them, his eyes burning with hatred. "This is not over," he said venomously. "You may have won today, but I will make sure you both regret crossing me." Two men stepped forward from the courthouse entrance then, and Tessa recognized them as territorial marshals. "Victor Sutton, you are under arrest for fraud and forgery," one of them said, producing handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." As Sutton was led away, still shouting threats and protests, Bennett pulled Tessa close. "It really is over," he said wonderingly. "The ranch is safe. Sutton is going to prison, and I am standing here with the most incredible woman in New Mexico territory." "You promised me dinner," Tessa reminded him, smiling up at him. "A proper courtship, you said." "I did promise that." Bennett's expression turned serious. "But first I need to say something. These past few days with you have been the best of my life, even with all the stress and worry. You make me want to be better, do more. You make me believe that two people who barely know each other can still recognize something real and worth fighting for." Tessa felt tears prick her eyes. "I feel the same way. When you walked into my office 4 days ago, I was just trying to survive, to prove I could make it on my own. You showed me that I do not have to be alone, that asking for help and giving help can be the start of something beautiful." "So is that a yes to courting? To seeing where this goes between us?" "That is a yes to everything," Tessa said. "To courting, to spending time together, to seeing what this remarkable connection between us might become." Bennett kissed her right there on the courthouse steps in front of God and the entire town of Las Cruces, and Tessa kissed him back with her whole heart. She heard someone whistle and someone else laugh, but she did not care. For the first time since her father died, she felt truly happy, truly hopeful about the future. The dinner Bennett promised turned into a regular occurrence. 3 times a week, he would come to town and take Tessa to the best restaurant Las Cruces offered, a small establishment run by a Mexican family that served excellent food. They would sit together for hours, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's stories, hopes, and dreams. Bennett also began teaching Tessa to ride properly. She had basic skills, but had never learned to truly handle a horse with confidence. Out at the ranch, under his patient instruction, she discovered a love for riding across the open desert, feeling the power of the animal beneath her and the endless sky above. "You are a natural," Bennett told her one afternoon as they walked their horses back to the barn after a long ride. "Another few weeks and you will be riding like you were born to it." "I like it out here," Tessa admitted. "The space, the quiet, the feeling that the land goes on forever. I understand now why you could never leave this place." Bennett helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist. They had been courting for 3 weeks now, and every moment together felt both familiar and exciting. "I am glad you feel that way, because I have been thinking about something and I want to ask your opinion." They sat together on a bench outside the barn, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. The desert glowed golden in the late afternoon light. "I need help managing the ranch," Bennett said carefully. "Not just the cattle and horses, but the business side of things." The contracts with buyers, the financial records, the legal aspects of water rights and grazing permits. My father struggled with all of that, and I am no better at it than he was. You want me to manage your books and legal documents? Tessa asked, intrigued by the idea. More than that. I want you to be my business partner. The ranch needs someone with your skills, your intelligence. We could be a team, you handling the administrative work and me handling the physical operation. Bennett turned to face her fully. But I need to be honest about my motivations. Part of this is practical. The ranch really does need your skills. But part of it is selfish. I want you here, want to see you every day, want to build something together. Tessa's mind was racing with possibilities. A business partnership with Bennett would mean regular income, interesting work, and a chance to be part of something meaningful. It would also mean spending significant time at the ranch, being intimately involved in Bennett's life and work. What would people say? She asked, voicing the concern she knew they both had. An unmarried woman working closely with an unmarried man, spending time alone together at your ranch. Let them say what they want. Bennett took her hand. But if it bothers you, if it threatens your reputation in town, we do not have to do this. I will not ask you to sacrifice your good name for the sake of the ranch. Tessa thought about it, weighing practicality against propriety. Then she smiled. When have I ever cared what people think? My father raised me to use my mind, not to worry about gossip. If I can help the ranch succeed while doing work I am good at and enjoy, then that is what I should do. Bennett's face lit up with joy. You mean it? You will be my partner, on one condition. You let me invest in the ranch as well, make it a true partnership. I have some money from my father's estate, enough to buy a percentage share. That way it is not charity or favors, it is business. She squeezed his hand. Equal partners in business and in life. They drew up the partnership papers together, with Tessa handling the legal language and Bennett contributing his knowledge of the ranch's assets and needs. It took a week of negotiations and planning, but by the end, they had a formal agreement that made Tessa a 25% owner of Three Rivers Ranch in exchange for her financial investment and her services managing the business operations. The transition was surprisingly smooth. Tessa began spending 3 days a week at the ranch, working in a small office Bennett set up for her in a corner of the house. She organized his chaotic financial records, renegotiated contracts with cattle buyers that had been heavily weighted against the ranch, and filed the proper paperwork to secure additional water rights that Benjamin Hayes had never known he was entitled to claim. Within 2 months, the ranch's financial situation had improved dramatically. Tessa's business acumen combined with Bennett's ranching skills made them a formidable team. More importantly, working together deepened their relationship in ways that simple courting never could. They learned to navigate disagreements, to trust each other's judgment, to celebrate successes together. By autumn, everyone in Las Cruces simply accepted that Bennett Hayes and Tessa Whitmore were a matched pair, and the more progressive townspeople spoke approvingly of their modern partnership. The gossip still whispered, but their whispers had less power when confronted with the evidence of a thriving ranch and a woman who clearly knew her own mind. It was October when Bennett asked Tessa to stay for dinner at the ranch, and then suggested they take a walk under the stars. The desert night was cool and clear, the sky brilliant with more stars than seemed possible. They walked hand in hand along the creek that gave the ranch its name, listening to the water murmur over stones. I want to ask you something, Bennett said, stopping in a spot where the cottonwood trees opened to reveal the full sky. And I need you to answer honestly, with all that brilliant directness you have. Tessa turned to face him, her heart beginning to race. She had a feeling she knew what was coming. Bennett took both her hands, his expression serious in the starlight. "These past 4 months have been the happiest of my life. Not just because the ranch is doing well, though that matters, but because I get to share it with you, wake up knowing I will see you later that day, work beside you, laugh with you, learn from you. You have become essential to my life, Tessa. I cannot imagine a future without you in it." "Ben," she whispered, emotion thick in her throat. "I love you," he said simply. "I think I started falling for you the moment you looked up from those contracts and told me exactly what was wrong with them. I love your intelligence, your courage, your kindness. I love the way you never back down from a challenge. I love the way you make me want to be better, smarter, braver." He took a breath. "Tessa Whitmore, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner in every way for the rest of our lives?" Tessa felt tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you too, Ben. I think I started falling for you when you trusted me completely with something that mattered so much to you. You have given me purpose, partnership, and a love I never thought I would find." Bennett pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple band with a small diamond that caught the starlight. "This was my mother's," he said as he slipped it onto her finger. "My father kept it all these years. I think he would be happy knowing it is yours now." They kissed under the vast New Mexico sky. Two people who had found each other through contracts and ledgers and had discovered something far more valuable than either had expected. The wedding was held in November, a simple ceremony at the small church in Las Cruces. Tessa wore a dress of ivory silk that the seamstress had worked on for weeks, and Bennett wore his best suit with a string tie and boots so polished they shone. Nearly the whole town turned out to witness the union, curious to see the unconventional couple make things official. Judge Morrison himself gave Tessa away, standing in for her late father. "Your father would have been proud of you," he whispered as they walked up the aisle. "You have honored his memory by using the education he gave you to help others, and by finding a man who values your mind as much as your heart." After the ceremony, there was a celebration at Three Rivers Ranch. Neighbors brought food, a trio of musicians played, and people danced in the yard as the autumn sun set in brilliant orange and gold. Tessa danced with her new husband, laughing as he spun her around, feeling more complete than she had ever imagined possible. "Happy, Mrs. Hayes?" Bennett asked, pulling her close as they swayed to a slower song. "Incredibly happy, Mr. Hayes." She looked up at him, at this good man who had walked into her office months ago desperate for help and had instead given her everything she needed. "Ready to start our life together." That life together unfolded with both joy and hard work. Tessa continued to manage the business side of the ranch, and her reputation grew as word spread of her skills. Other ranchers began consulting with her on their contracts and financial planning, and she built a thriving side business while still devoting most of her energy to Three Rivers Ranch. Bennett expanded the cattle operation, investing in better breeding stock and implementing new ranching techniques he had read about. With Tessa's financial management ensuring they had capital to invest, the ranch flourished. They hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increased workload, and those men became like family, eating meals with them and teaching Bennett and Tessa's children ranching skills years later. Because there were children, 3 of them eventually. A daughter named Elizabeth came first, born in the summer of 1884. She had her mother's sharp mind and her father's steady temperament. Then came twin boys 2 years later, Andrew and Thomas, rambunctious and full of energy, always ready for adventure. Tessa discovered that motherhood did not mean giving up her work. She simply adapted, keeping ledgers while Elizabeth napped nearby, teaching her daughter to read at an early age with the same patience Bennett showed teaching the boys to ride. The children grew up understanding that their mother was as much a part of running the ranch as their father, that her work with contracts and finances was just as important as his work with cattle and horses. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Bennett and Tessa sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set. Elizabeth was 12 now, already showing signs of inheriting her mother's gift for numbers. The twins were 10, already competent riders who helped with ranch chores. "You remember the day we met?" Bennett asked, his arm around Tessa's shoulders. "You looked up from your desk, and I thought I had never seen anyone so focused and confident." "I remember thinking you had kind eyes," Tessa replied, leaning into him. "And I remember how completely you trusted me with something that meant everything to you. Best decision I ever made." Bennett kissed the top of her head. "Giving you that ledger and my trust changed my entire life." Tessa looked out at the land that had become her home, at the children who were her joy, at the man who had become her partner in every possible way. The journey that had started with forged contracts and legal battles had led to this, a life rich with purpose, love, and family. "I think about Sutton sometimes," she admitted. "About how his attempt to steal your ranch is what brought us together. He is still in prison and will be for years to come." "His greed and dishonesty led to justice and joy," Bennett said thoughtfully. "Not the way he planned it, but perhaps the way it was meant to be. You saved my ranch, Tessa, but more than that, you gave me a reason to build something bigger than just holding on to what my father left me. You gave me a future worth working toward." The children called to them then, Elizabeth wanting to show off a new trick she had taught her horse, the twins arguing good-naturedly about something only they understood. Bennett and Tessa rose together to join their family, hands linked the way they had been since that day in the courtroom when they had beaten impossible odds. Years later, when their children had grown and started families of their own, Tessa would sometimes return to that small office in Las Cruces where everything had begun. She kept it as her business headquarters, though the ranch house held most of her important documents now. Sitting at that old desk, she would remember the desperate cowboy who had walked through her door with a ledger and a problem he could not solve alone. She would remember how quickly trust had turned to friendship, friendship to love, love to a partnership that had lasted a lifetime. And she would smile, grateful that she had said yes to reading those contracts, yes to fighting that battle, yes to building a life with Bennett Hayes. Because sometimes the most important contracts were not the ones written on paper and bound by law. Sometimes the most important contracts were the ones written on hearts, sealed with trust, and honored through a lifetime of shared work, shared dreams, and shared love. Sometimes a woman who read contracts faster than anyone else could also read the heart of a good man and recognize that what he offered was far more valuable than legal language could ever express. Bennett found her there one afternoon in their later years, both of them graying but still strong, still devoted to each other and to the ranch that had become so much more than land and cattle. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her desk, the same chair he had sat in more than 30 years earlier. "I am thinking about how a ledger and a stack of forged contracts led to the best life I could have imagined," Tessa replied, reaching across the desk to take his weathered hand in hers. "I am thinking about how grateful I am that you walked through that door." "I am the grateful one," Bennett said, his blue eyes still as warm and honest as the day they met. "You could have just done the contract work and sent me on my way. Instead, you fought for me, believed in me, and then spent a lifetime building something beautiful with me." They sat together in that office where their story had begun. Two people who had found each other through unusual circumstances and had chosen each other every day since. Outside, Las Cruces had grown and changed, the wild frontier days gradually giving way to a more settled territory on the verge of statehood. But some things remained constant. Three Rivers Ranch still thrived under their management, now recognized as one of the most successful operations in New Mexico. Their children had inherited their parents' work ethic and values, each finding their own path while remaining connected to the land their grandparents had fought to protect. And in that small office, where contracts were still reviewed and business was still conducted with integrity and skill, the legacy of trust that had started with a desperate cowboy and a brilliant woman continued. Because Tessa had never stopped reading contracts faster than anyone else could, and Bennett had never stopped trusting her completely with everything that mattered. Together, they had built not just a successful ranch, but a life that proved love and partnership could overcome any obstacle, as long as two people were willing to trust each other with their whole hearts. That trust, given freely on a hot July day in 1882, and renewed every day since, was the foundation of everything good in their lives. It was worth more than any contract, more valuable than any piece of land, more precious than anything else in the world. And as they sat together in comfortable silence, hands linked across the old mahogany desk, Bennett and Tessa Hayes knew they had found something rare and perfect. A love story written in ledger entries and legal documents, sealed with trust and lasting a lifetime.